I would like to introduce you to our panel this morning. I think if we begin with yourself, Raoul, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Raoul Harris. I'm Chief Creative Officer here at Ocean Technologies Group. And my background has been 20 years really of working in maritime technology, mostly around maritime e-learning. So a lot with content as well, developing various kind of materials to help seafarers and sometimes shore-based personnel as well to deal with some of the kind of issues that we're going to be talking about today and to prepare them for that. And in my role as well as Ocean Technologies Group, I do a lot of the work out at events and stuff and meeting some very interesting people, such as those that we have joining us today. So Andy, you and I have worked together for 20 years since I came into this industry, I think. So yes, if you could introduce yourself for us. A mainstay, I should say, you're also a mainstay of these events as well. So please.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you, Raoul. Yeah, so I'm Andy Eastown. I'm a naval architect and marine engineer by training. Started as an apprentice many years ago, working for the Ministry of Defence. And I spent 10 years with them, 28 years with the Lloyd's Register, both as a surveyor and as a manager. I ended up as training manager at Lloyd's Register. 3 years with Shell, where I was the same kind of role, really, although it was called learning advisor in Shell, working for shipping and maritime. And then the last around 11 years, I've been working as a maritime consultant and with various parts of OTG. Before it was OTG, Videotel, Seagull, Marine Training Services, and now OTG. I was a surveyor for around 20 years, so of that 28, carrying out inspections and surveys, so building ships, repairing ships, inspecting ships for classification and so on. So I have a strong background in the inspection side.
So could you give us a bit of an introduction to your background, please?
Yeah, I spent 35 years at sea with SO, Bergeson, and most of my time was with Shell. In Shell, I filled various roles, both as a seafarer, but also in the DPA team, the recruitment team, and the maritime assurance team. I've been ashore, if you like, with Cambridge Maritime for the last 9 years now, carrying out ship inspections, audits. Cambridge Maritime have a one-stop shop, whether it be deck, engineering, or some other niche markets.
Yeah. So you're out there, and we'll talk about the different kinds of inspections in a moment, but you pretty much, Cambridge Maritime pretty much offers a kind of full service, right, of these kind of inspection audits. Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's get into the content and what you can expect us to talk about. I was alluding to this a little bit. Introductions, we've done that bit with a few technical issues, but we're there. We'll talk about why inspection readiness is really important. To get into sort of how we can prepare your crew for success, how to sort of manage that whole kind of process. We'll talk about what the inspectors want to see. The upcoming CIC, we'll get into that. So what's a kind of inspection focus area that you're going to see? And we'll talk about a lot of the solutions potentially to that problem as well. I do make no apology that we quite often find the conversation goes into different directions. So we may not tackle all those things necessarily in that order. But let's get into it. The other thing was, I know some of you have already jumped on the poll. There is a poll kind of running. There are questions and stuff we'll be collecting as we go. So do feel free. We'll probably just deal with questions at the end, just in the interest of time. But if I spot something interesting in there, I'll try and pick it out as well as we go. I'm going to kind of lead the chat here, but hopefully you'll be hearing more from these gentlemen than you will from me. So let's get into it, really. I think, James, we can probably drop the slide deck now, because we'll get into the actual discussion. And I think the first thing is, we've said this is a huge audience, massive sign-ups for this, over nearly 600 people, I think, signing up for this webinar. Why are inspections so important? Andy, maybe start with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, the real reason for having inspections is to make sure that the ship is safe to operate. I mean, that's the sort of fundamental side of things. And and everybody's doing their own thing. So depending on which industry you're in, whether it's tankers, it's SIRE. If you're in dry ships, it's right ship, and now dry BMS. You've got to do classification service and so on. And the fundamental part of that is safety. And then the other element to it, of course, is the sort of the fact that you want the ships not just to operate safely, but efficiently. So certainly the sort of higher elements of the inspection regime are around operation and really environmentally correct operation, and to make sure that the ship complies with all the elements of the statutory legislation. But going beyond that, and certainly this is what SIRE, TMSA, right ship are looking for, is that you are operating the ship well with good, capable people.
And yeah, maybe thanks, Andy. But Hayden, what can be some of the consequences of an inspection in terms of,
I think we really have to look as I think we have to look from the commercial point of view as well. A lot of companies now use the inspection report as a differentiator with regards to, if it's a choice between two vessels, they'll look at report, which one has a better safety, which one's operated better. And they're starting to use the inspections more as a differentiator from that point of view. So basically, we're all in a business. We all want to make that money. We all want to operate safely, efficiently, and well. So a lot of companies now are just focusing on the inspections, and they're using that as the yardstick for which ship.
Yeah.
If they've got a charter out there, they've got inspections of 4 or 5 different ships. They're going to look at them. They're going to drill down, look for the differentiators of their safety record, their inspection record, how well are they performing all round. And it makes a difference.
Yeah. And just to add to that, Hayden, it also is the trigger for a lot of port state control inspections. So if they see that there are outstanding conditions of class, subjects of class, if they see that surveys have been skipped, if they see that there's poor results from inspections, then, in addition to other factors such as the age and the flag, that's another trigger for, shall we say, extra interest from port state control. And
I think one of the things that's sorry, just zooming in on that as well, like where you do get an inspection, if the inspection goes poorly, there can be quite big financial consequences as well. Now, obviously, we're as an industry, we're very focused on accidents, but getting delayed in port due to deficiencies and things like that can also be extremely costly. Obviously it depends on the trade and the freight rates at the time and stuff, but it can be $50,000 a day, for example, to be stuck in port, right?
That's just the charter costs, Raoul, because invariably there's a whole load of repair costs, lost time costs. There's a whole raft of other things that come in. So it can be millions of dollars actually. If you're delayed, say, for a week or something, that could really have a significant impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, good. Now you sort of listed a few different types of inspections. Not all inspections are equal, let's say, or all the same. Can you just give us? Hayden, you conduct different inspections from different sort of regimes and stuff. Can you just give us a bit of a flavour of what's different about the different kinds of inspections that you do on behalf of different people?
Well, a lot of them have different focuses. Like a port state inspection is going to be very much different from a right ship. They're going to have at the very core a lot of overlap, a lot of common elements. But with a right ship and maybe a SIRE, they will have then an operational twist to it, as opposed to a port state, which is very firmly focused on safety. Safety and statutory compliance. So when you start getting down into, sorry?
No, please carry on. There's a bit of a lag, I think, but yeah, I thought you'd stopped, but you were still in full voice. So please carry on.
Pausing for breath. Same as we conduct pre-purchase inspections, pre-charter inspections, and also pre-vetting inspections. If a ship knows it's getting a SIRE, and maybe the operators are a little bit, should we say, lacking in assurance that the vessel is ready, it might require a pre-vetting inspection. It's each inspection has its own flavour, because what's the desirous outcome in this?
Yeah, and just to add to that, Hayden, the focus, of course, is shifting more and more towards human performance as well, and SIRE is probably the most prominent example of that, with the assessment that the inspector has to make of the actual competence capability of the crew. Not a full competence assessment, we have to say, but with some very strict criteria on the performance influencing factors. But we can see as well with RightShip, they're looking more and more towards, is the person capable, they have proper training records and so on. So yeah, as you say, quite a wide variety from the sort of purely compliance view all the way up to, are the people operating this ship capable? Have they got the right, not just the right STCW certificates, but can they actually demonstrate to me that they can do the job? And I think that was certainly one of the worries about the introduction of the SIRE 2.0 regime. And it now means that if you have a technical fault, shall we say, and so an observation is going to be raised, it's likely to be raised not just for the technical fault, but also for the human element part of that as well. And that's another difference that we've seen now with these inspection regimes.
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's been
very much so.
That's been a massive focus and a massive change. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to the poll. So we're running a little poll alongside. You can see that if you click up there. And which type, but the question I wanted to know from people is, which type of inspection do you find the most challenging to prepare for? And as we can see there in the results, it's no surprise that SIRE is the one, running at 51% as opposed to the nearest one, PSC inspection at 21, RightShip. Surprisingly, RightShip only at 16, because anecdotally, I find quite a lot of people have been, I wouldn't say been struggling, or certainly it's been an area where they've needed some support and where they've been talking to us about how we can help. And we'll get into that perhaps a little bit later. But what's your view, gentlemen, looking at the poll there? Anything that surprises you, or?
No, just the same role. I'm surprised that SIRE is so far ahead of the RightShip and the port set control. But that's great. That gives us an area to focus on then in our conversation here. Yeah,
I mean, I expect that maybe reflects the makeup of the audience as well, perhaps as well.
Yeah.
When we look at these things. So Hayden, let's get into sort of, we talked about some of those different inspections there, but what is it that an inspector's looking for? What are they hoping to see when they come on board the ship?
Well, I mean, the inspection, a lot of people forget the inspection starts from when the vessel is sighted, whether it be hull condition, when they walk up the gangway, pilot ladder, or whichever way they make access on board, how they're met when they go on board. Is there a security check? Is the vessel operating as it should? And then the walk from there to the captain's office. You can generally get a good feel of the ship. How well is it maintained? Is it tidy? What's the housekeeping like? It's. I know a lot of SIRE inspectors think all ships smell of paint and fresh grease. But with a bit of codology aside, you can generally get a broad picture of the ship as you go on board. The professionalism of the people when they're met, sit down, the level of cooperation. But what we're basically looking for is cooperation from the ship and honesty and transparency. And we've all been there. As I say, a lot of our inspectors have spent 20 plus years at sea. So they know what it is. When they were at sea, they were subjects of these inspections. I almost said victims then instead. But they've been subjected to these inspections. So they've seen both sides of it. If you like, it's a bit sort of poacher turned gamekeeper. So they know what they're doing. Be honest with us, be transparent, and just tell us the truth. If there is an observation or if there's a finding, it's not personal. And a lot of companies now are having pre-vetting inspections and now calling them what they actually are. They're a gap analysis. Use them as a learning tool, share those learnings with the fleet or other vessels in the same class and take it forward. So that I think there has been a sea change in the way that the inspections are thought of, which is great.
Yeah, and
and
the
I'm sure
opposite,
that if we
the
did this
opposite
same
side of that, Hayden, is the unprepared ship, where you're in for a long day because you go on board and they don't even know why you're there. So haven't had that communication amongst the team. They ask you what you want to see in the hope that they'll get away with stuff. There's no sort of defect list, so everything is apparently 100%, and then of course you start going around and you find problems, and then you feel like, what else are they hiding? I need to take a closer look. So as you said, really, that transparency and that honesty is really, really important, because it sets the tone for the inspection, in the sense that you want to, the surveyors or the inspector, or the auditor, really wants the ship to do well. But if the first things that they find are the opposite of that, then they know they've got to look very carefully and very closely at things. So, it might seem quite trivial, as you say, walking up to the ship, how you're met and so on, but actually it really is important, because it sets the tone. And then when you go to speak to the master and he's ready and he's prepared and he's got his list of defects, and he says, look, I'm really sorry, but this still isn't working, but we've put in a request for parts, and we're expecting the technician to arrive shortly, and so on. It gives you a sense of confidence that they've got these things in hand, that it's a well-managed, well-run, well-organized ship, and that really changes, how you can approach that vessel's inspection.
I'll share a quick anecdote with you, because it amused me last week. Someone told me about, it was a surveyor who'd been working for Class, and he was with a Norwegian colleague, and they were on a Greek ship, and what the crew didn't know was that this young Norwegian fellow had been brought up in a shipping family, spent a large part of his life in Greek, and was fluent in it, and you could hear them talking in Greek about how they were going to kind of hoodwink these inspectors and kind of, try and kind of manage them through the thing. And of course, they kept finding everything that these guys were talking about. And so be careful. And your point about honesty and transparency, I think, is a very important one, as well as the fact that they actually want the inspection to go well. I think that's an interesting thing. You actually want to come away with a good outcome. So what are you started to get into some of the things that could, let's talk about the pitfalls now. What are the common, what are the sort of things that the crew can look out for? What are the common challenges that they'll face when they're getting into an inspection?
Well, if I start, Hayden,
I think a lot of it boils down.
Oh, sorry, you start, Hayden. I'll chip in. You start, Hayden.
No, please, Andy, there you go.
Okay. So yeah, the common pitfalls, and I would say, unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to preparation and understanding their role, and particularly now, and notice that there's a few questions about SIRE are popping up there. Being confident to speak to the inspector, being able to answer his questions. There is a technique, and when people, if you like, overshare, then you start to get worried that what are they trying to cover up? Are they trying to keep me from going to other bits of the ship, or is what is it that they're not really telling me? But the main thing I would say is lack of preparation. I mean, in a sense, you could say that ships these days, today, really need to be ready for an inspection at any time. And it's not just something you can do when you get to port. It's not just something you can do when you go to dry dock. You have to be really prepared that at any moment an inspection could take place, whether it's port state control, whether it's SIRE, whatever it is, and that you should be basically ready. I mean, there really shouldn't be any gaps in your system, your safety management system, your records. They should all be up to date. And, this is, I think, paraphrasing an old Prime Minister of the UK, and he talked about education. Preparation. Really, that is what I would say is the key. Would you agree, Hayden?
I would wholeheartedly. I know when you go on board, the crew have been well briefed. When they meet you at the gangway, security checks, everything else, escort you to the ship's office. where you're met with the conference table or the ship's office table with all the certificates and the books laid out on it, open to the appropriate index, you think, I'm in for a good day. You know, if they've taken the time out and thought about it, it's how can we facilitate this? And when you're going to go out down the engine room or an inspection of the deck, you're taken to a cabin to get changed in. So you put your boiler suit and your PPE on, and there's a bottle of water in there. It's little differentiators. And I know that may not directly impact on the inspection, but again, it reflects on the preparation and the thought that's gone into it. And normally if you've got that level of thought, that's right at the end of the list when they've been through everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go on a few ships and you know that they've been using the same checklist as you for sort of, if you like, a bit of an internal audit departmentally before the inspection happens, you think, yeah, we're dealing with a thinking crew, not a reactionary. I mean, that makes all the difference.
Sorry, Ron, I just add to that last point that the preparation is easier now than it's ever been, in the sense that, you know, SIRE are telling you exactly the evidence that they're looking for. So there's not really any excuse. You can't really say, oh, but, you know, I didn't know, because they've detailed for every question exactly the evidence that they're going to look for. So, and it's getting more and more like that with RightShip as well. So to say, oh, well, I didn't know is not really a very good excuse, because it's already there. And what you're trying to do is prepare yourself to give that evidence in a very straightforward manner. It should all just be laid out and ready so that the inspector can move on. And that's really, you know, something that's a change in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, and we talked about one of the changes earlier, but some of what you've been both describing there in the interactions with the crew has been about sort of things like communication and sort of leadership stuff, which is obviously, you know, that might have been something you were kind of judging in the background, but that's now explicitly being looked at when we come to SIRE through human factors, etc., and looking at it through that lens. So how important is that aspect of it, you know, like the way in which the crew interact and communicate with both you and with each other? Hayden, maybe if you could give us your view on that.
Yeah, I think it's vitally important. I mean, I've conducted inspections where you've gone on board and the crew have been less than welcoming, and, you know, officers and crew, everyone on board. Sometimes, as Andy mentioned before, because they didn't know you were arriving, which is always an unpleasant surprise. But also it's a question of when you go on board and there's almost that level of resentment, you know, because the company are being seen to be punishing them or inflicting an inspection upon the ship and everyone on board. And it's not like that at all. And a lot of this, the tone setting comes from the culture on board, and the culture that is fostered by the management team ashore. You know, and that filters down very quickly, no matter how much they may feel themselves distant from it.
And actually, just as an aside, this is one of the discussions that I've had with quite a lot of charterers recently, the cultural aspect that they've started, and some of them are actually talking about actually auditing, you know, the office as well, being very keen to see what the culture is there, because they know that that's going to be so influential on the crew itself. So Andy, you mentioned preparation. How can the crew best prepare, or how can we best prepare a crew for? Yeah.
Well, Hayden's already mentioned the checklist and the questionnaires and so on. So whether it's the RightShip RISQ, whether it's the SIRE 2.0, these are the already laid out for you, the questions that are going to be asked, the areas that the inspector is going to look at. So study those, break them down by department, make sure that each department knows what the questions are and that they have all the documentary evidence ready, so that when the inspector asks, they've got it there. There's no question fumbling around. Oh, I don't know where that is. I need to find it, and so on. But also practice. I would say, really, you want to give people the opportunity to actually say the words out loud. It really shouldn't be on the day that the inspector arrives, that the first time that somebody gets asked that question, you should have asked it, as you know, your senior officer should have asked those questions beforehand, so that you are prepared to say. And then you know, it doesn't come as a surprise to you. You're prepared in advance, and really that is the best thing. So I would definitely recommend a bit of role play. You know, ask one of the senior officers to play the role of the inspector, to go round, be a little bit tough on the departments, you know, make sure that they have actually got all the right answers to the questions, that they have got the right paperwork and so on. And it comes back to what Hayden was talking about, sort of pre-inspection audits and so on. Same kind of thing. The ship can do that. Some companies have even gone to the extent of having flashcards prepared, which just sit in the mess room, so that with the questions written out, so when people are having a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, they can look at the flashcards, they can ask each other the questions, and that really helps to boost that sort of teamwork and communication side of things.
Thanks, Andy. And what about training? Because obviously that's something we can talk about as a potential solution. But how important is training, do you think, in preparation for inspections? Hayden, if I could ask you to get your view on that.
Oh, I think it's highly important, not just training, as Andy said, of how to interact with the inspector. I think it can set the whole tone. It's because we don't want people prepped with the perfect answer, but we want them to have the communication tools to be able to get across the training that they've received. You know, it should be emphasized by the senior management team, both ashore and on board, that it's not a witch hunt. The inspectors are there to make sure, or have that level of assurance, that people are doing what they say and they say what they do. And at the end of the day, that's it.
Yeah.
You know,
and then,
no one goes on board with their own agenda.
No. But on the training side of things, I think one of the really sort of important parts of it is that people often find that the gap between, if you like, nautical college and where they're on board the ship, the operational aspects, you know, there's quite a big difference, and it's important that training is available to them so that they can fill those gaps, so they can develop their knowledge rapidly. And I think the other element to it as well is that now more and more, because of the availability of training, I mean, once upon a time, as you know, Raoul, we were sending videos out to ships, and it was a big thing to actually get everybody together and get into the mess room and put a video on. Now you can have it on your phone, and you can look, and you can decide, you know, oh, this is an area I need to know some more about, and you can do a quick bit of preparation as well. So I think training has shifted quite a lot. But the fact that it's available, the fact that it's accessible now, that's really making a big difference, because it helps people to, perhaps where they're not quite so confident, they can bolster their knowledge, they can boost their knowledge, and you know, really improve their performance.
And you mentioned some of the digital formats there, Andy. I think one of the other advantages that I see with digital over certain other, you know, and I do believe in a blended approach, but the good thing about digital is that it does create that evidence, that record as well. I mean, Hayden, when you're talking to as part of an inspection, you're getting into what training is being provided, how important is it for you to see some evidence of that?
We always ask as a pre-board, or as soon as we get on board, if they can print off their latest matrix for the crew currently on board for modules completed. Because it can reflect, it also reflects if the company set precedence by saying, you know, there'll be 2 hours of overtime or 3 hours of overtime a week for the crew to indulge in CBT or in training. And the most proactive companies as well are putting things in place to bridge the gap between knowledge and competency.
Yeah, I think that's really, you make a really important point there around, like, you know, it's not good enough to just have the solution. You've got to show that you're actually making it possible for people to do that as well. So anyway, I want to kind of, if you could bring the deck back, James, because I want to get into that. So we've just been talking about training and the fact that training can play a role. I just want to get into some statistical data that we've got now, because it helps to kind of frame the conversation, I think. So we've said, posited that training is an important factor in this. What I'm bringing up now is, and this is PSC data. Now, port state control data, for those that don't know, as opposed to, say, RightShip data or the SIRE data, it is publicly available, and it's often used by people to kind of look at performance. And what we're looking at here is the deficiency rate based on the difference between our customers, Ocean Technologies Group, and sort of everybody else. Now, the way to think about that is, so you got on the one hand the others focus, so that's the sort of the rest of the fleet, if you like, and then looking at that deficiency rate, which is lower. Now, we have to be very careful here to set the expectation. I'm not suggesting that we fix this problem. We immediately kind of lead to these kind of massively different outcomes. But what we can say about this cohort that we're looking at, that are enjoying that 44% fewer deficiencies and about half as many detention rates, is that we can say with certainty, and there's all different types of ships in here, all different kind of sizes of companies and all that kind of thing. But what we know about all of them is all of them have a digital training solution in place, and all of them have a means to record and manage that training. And it would appear, looking at the data statistically here, that that is a differentiating factor in how well they then perform in inspections. I mean, Andy, what's your perspective of this? Because, as I said, we are caveating it very heavily. There's a lot of other things about these companies that are affecting that. But would you say that this is kind of like, gives us a steer that that's an important kind of element to that success?
I think it does. It really does. I mean, this is something the industry's been sort of trying to find out for a long time. Does training really make a difference? And the answer is, well, we think it does, but we're not sure. But now I think we do really have some very good evidence here, and I think that the real sort of underlying cause of it, not saying it's just about training, it's about the companies that are interested in developing their own people, who have invested in learning systems, who are encouraging their people to develop themselves and to improve their performance. And so for me, that's, if you like, we could be looking at the companies that care about their seafarers and are interested in good performance and high efficiency, are investing in learning. And then that's reflected in the fact here that we have, these lower port state detention rates and fewer deficiencies.
Yeah, there will be many, many contributing factors. It's only an element, but it would seem to be a differentiator of sorts. Hayden, any thoughts from you on that one?
Yeah, I think it is very, very noticeable when we're conducting experiments. The level of training and investment in people is directly linked to the culture of the company. So the more proactive a company is, the more they'll invest in people, understand the situation, and the training will be generally of a higher level, because it's not just a tick box exercise. Everyone must get through these modules in X amount of time. Thank you very much, done. They actually care about the competency and the learning outcome at the end of it. Yeah. So a lot of it generally does reflect on the company.
Yeah. I just want to, I'll just kind of give you a bit of a steer. So what we're talking about with the evidence, what is it those people have? When we talk about like, it's the ocean learning platform that we're talking about. And Andy mentioned there, how accessible it is, whether it's, and the thing about it is, so we're talking about something that's ubiquitous. You can get it on mobile app. They can study online, and it's also installed on the vessel as well. So the material is available to them wherever they need it. And to your point, Andy, I think you mentioned a bit earlier on, the ability to kind of, to be able to drop in and refresh your knowledge, to look at some of those things that have changed and been updated since you picked up your COC back in the day, and all of that sort of stuff, as well as role-based courses. And I'll just kind of, for those that are uninitiated, we're talking about a very big training library. No one, of course, would need all of it because it's very specialized to different ship types and all of that sort of stuff. But we're really talking about materials and that cover things like safety, that security, all the main pillars, the environmental sort of side of it as well. looking at some of those specifics, like, for example, some of the inspection stuff, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there are, and then some of those softer skills as well, when you're looking to kind of get communication and all of those kind of elements in there as well as kind of role-based specific stuff. So there's a lot of material in there potentially that can help with the sort of excellence generally. But then there's some very specific stuff. So if you look at something like SIRE 2.0, which is a major focus there, we're looking at a learning kind of pathway within that that's really looking at, you can see there, you've got stuff on preparing for the inspection, what you should do pre-inspection, the inspection itself, how to close out that meeting, and then the additional style of things in human factors as well. Now, Andy, you worked on this particular series of titles, I think, as well, didn't you? So
yeah.
You're well versed.
So the previous SIRE programs, one of them was just a video that you listened to for an hour. There wasn't really any assessment to it. There wasn't really any sort of confirmation of learning. The other one was a series of modules which were quite long. So the idea with this was to break it up into small parts, and as you say, to break it into the different elements, so that if you were particularly concerned about the actual inspection, for example, you don't need to do the other bits. You can go straight to there. Or if the bit that's worrying you is the human factors, have a look at the human factors, see what the inspector will do, understand what the performance influencing factors are, and then you can help yourself to understand what you need to do during the actual inspection. I think one of the things, crew are always worried, oh, the inspector's going to come. You know, it feels like God has descended, and all of a sudden the whole focus of the world is on you as an AB or a bosun or whatever. And I think, you know, if you understand what they're going to ask in the way that and why they're asking you it, it's a really big help. And then if you've practiced it as well, then it needn't be such a big thing. It's a bit like the fear of public speaking. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah. Now, this was obviously a massive change, and we needed to take everyone on that journey, and we could see people got ahead of the game. When we look at the take up of the data, lots of companies prepared, some of them quite late, but others got on it really early. But as well as the kind of specific stuff there's a lot of areas, for example, to SIRE. And this is a good example of where we kind of look at the library and sort of, I mean, there's a lot more than say 20 titles that are shown here. But there are different elements that you can look at from inspection success and typical things that come up in inspection. And you curated these, Andy, this list of titles here, because this was sort of, you thought like, these are kind of ones that can contribute to specific ranks on board. So I mean, the message here, maybe you could talk about this better than me, but it's really about thinking about how can you use e-learning to strengthen some of those different elements that surround. So not just learning about what's going to happen in the inspection, but some of the things that support good inspection performance.
So really, this was based on the titles which we felt would be of the most help, if you like. So yes, as you say, that there could be 100 titles in that list, but we just looked at the ones that were the most used, the ones that were, and you can see it's broken down into oil tanker, chemical tanker, and gas tanker. The 20 that were felt would be of the most benefit, because some people really didn't know where to start. It was obvious to do the SIRE programs itself, but what else? You know, what else would be of benefit? So where it's a combination of where we know that there were difficulties and you know, some of the areas which, for example, risk assessment and management. You know, the risk assessment is always one of the sort of areas which is going to be looked at. And
just in the interest of time, Andy, as well, is a very similar thing as well, looking at RightShip. Yeah. Now, again, I think you looked at the risk questionnaire and you mapped, I mean, there's hundreds of titles on that list, but
there are lots and lots of titles. We've mapped to every question, and in RightShip there are about 550 questions. So there's an awful lot there, and there's a lot of overlap. You know, so again, it does depend a little bit on the type of ship that you've got, but generally, you know, there's the same kind of titles are really important for each of those ships.
But I think the key message here, just in the interest of time, is obviously looking at we can help you to focus on some of those areas and look at some of those, learn from some of the inspection performance stuff that you've seen from your own company audits to tailor things expressly. Now, the questions are filling up, and I want to get to those as soon as possible. But just a quick word on the concentrated inspection campaign. First of all, Hayden, what is a concentrated inspection campaign, the CIC?
Concentrated inspection campaign is just a focus on certain areas. It might be things have come alight, or there's a trend that's been developing, and it's been recognised through careful tracking. So you'll have a concentrated inspection on that area, that type of ship, to make sure that it doesn't carry forward. I think it's very much been carried out in the past under anonymous means by port state. They will have their own trend analysis. They will monitor the inspections of various ships and the various inspection companies, and then they will have a concentration on it. Same with flag state.
Yeah, no, brilliant, thanks. And so as well as sort of big changes like SIRE, there are also focus areas, and you will get this. And normally, to help you out, they normally do talk about these ahead of time. Ballast water is the feature of the CIC, upcoming CIC. And you can see here, this is just a little snapshot of how some of our customers, and you can see that sort of steady arc of people kind of working on that. I mean, it's a big topic anyway. I'm not saying it's entirely due to the CIC. We can see a bit of an uptick, and I would imagine that that's because people can see that coming. So again, thinking about ahead to where the focus is going to be from the inspectors, where are the trends, what's coming out of those, and you can adopt a training strategy that goes alongside it. Now, I want to get to the you mentioned, well, these are I won't dwell on this one too much, but these are additional cuts of the same data that we saw, and you can see here that this is where people are using our assessment tests. So these are computer-based training tests normally used for pre-inspection, and you can see that this is also a differentiator in terms of data and performance in inspections as well. So it's about 2% lower deficiencies for people that are using this. And I, in the interest of time, I'm going to zoom ahead to the next cut of data, which is about the competency management system, because those two things kind of go hand in hand. Now, Andy, the competence management system, if you like, is really part of the learning management system, but it kind of sits at the top, right? It sort of sits at the kind of your pinnacle, I guess, of operations. I don't know what you want to, before we have a look at what that does to the data, just tell us a little bit more about what we're looking at from a competency management system as opposed to a normal learning management system.
Yeah, I think the main difference is that you're actually going to carry out an on-the-job in-role assessment here. Sometimes, as you say, it's pre-employment, other times mostly for promotion in rank, but also for assessment of capability in rank as well. And that's where it's really helpful, because it can identify areas of strength and weakness, and it can give you the opportunity to focus on them and see, where you can improve and so on. And then it also helps you to align overall your sort of company strategy as well. You can see whether people have the skills to push your strategy, the strategic focus of the workforce as well. So it has both a very practical, personal sort of performance improvement basis, but also it can help the company by the areas that it wants to focus on.
In the interest of time, Andy, I think it's a way of actually capturing stuff beyond, say, what's being done in e-learning, but in a digital format. So you're able to capture, was someone able to perform this specific task? Yeah. You can build those proficiencies beyond, so it's about actually the building of skills and so on. We've done whole kind of sessions on that. There's recordings available and stuff on what CMS is all about. But look at the interesting cut here. And so we know that everybody that has the learning platform has that's a prerequisite for the CMS. So we're talking about adding on top, if you like, from it. And we can see that the drop there is from, I think it's from, where are we? Where are
it was
we?
44.
From 46. Yeah. So it was 46% fewer. dropping all the way down to 54 deficiencies. So it's quite a sizable drop in terms of the what you see in terms of the deficiencies. So again, not a surprise to me, because again, it's those companies that are taking everything we talked about to the next level. I've just got one more cut to show you, because it's kind of interesting, because a crew management system is really all about kind of your payroll and how you manage that. There's a certification element to it as well, but it's a lot of kind of more about the kind of human resources management of marine, and that gives you again a further kind of cut as well, and benefit in terms of the deficiency rate too. So you get like a drop in that, and a benefit from that as well. So absolutely no idea why that may be, but I guess my take on it is that if you're really looking at building the right culture, if you're looking to really care for your seafarers, if you're looking to kind of make sure that you've got good audit trails and good support, that's something that is contributing to your inspection performance, which you might not expect, but I think it's kind of clearly there. Now, we promised questions. I think we should get into questions. So I'm going to jump ahead. This one slide I was just going to show you here. This is an example of what you can learn from inspections when you're looking at what comes out of you. And these are some deficiencies that we were going through helping a customer. And you can see there on the right, this is where their main sort of issues are coming from. And you can see, main deficiencies on the left of the screen. So fire safety being a big issue there. And then you look at the training and where they're actually applying the training. And it was this was a container vessel, very low down the list in terms of the training and the focus that they were putting on there. So the message here is really just try to align and learn from inspections, and look at then where you put your training dollar, as it were. So let's get into the Q&A. James, if you want to take the deck away so we can see a bit more of these wonderful chaps' faces, and we'll grab some questions. So let's have a look. Is it reasonable to expect a crew to like an inspection? It is a high pressure situation, and many of the SIRE questions are based on complex how-to diagrams, which may not be intuitive to crew. Can we expect crew to like inspections?
No. No one likes essentially being overlooked, judged, tested. But what it is, the attitude of the crew is generally a reflection of the senior management's approach. So if the senior management, they might get together at the monthly safety meeting and say, we've got an inspection sometime next week. A well-drilled, well-trained crew that has a good level of communication will accept it, that though it's not pleasant, it's a necessary evil. And they will be more accepting of it. So it generally is a reflection of the culture on board with how you met or how it's approached.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, you don't necessarily have to like them, but they could certainly be a lot more painful and a lot less stressful, I think, is one of the key things. And that, I think, is all about preparation. There are a lot of comments in the chat around time, around people not having the time on board, and around work and rest hours, already putting things under strain. I mean, have you seen any companies that sort of manage this well, or are there any ways of kind of getting around that? You mentioned some companies, Hayden, actually allocating time for training. Could you just talk about how you see that done well?
The companies that have a good culture, and they very much score quite highly on most of the differentiators, because they have a proactive approach. They'll recognize that training is essential to support competence. So they'll allot so many hours a week or so many hours a month for each person to spend, conducting CBT or training. And that goes on their overtime because it's an investment in the person. Mm-hmm. But it's also supported by the senior management team on board to make sure that person is using their time wisely with regards to training. Mm-hmm. Maybe a bit of guidance by a department head, but it's generally supported. It's not a question of, I've lost that man for 2 hours this week. It's, I've lost that person because they're trying to develop themselves for the benefit of the ship and the company.
Which is a real bugbear of mine, because often crew are often seen in that regard as well as being a cost, you know. And if you actually look at them as an asset to invest in and actually being directly contributed to your bottom line. I just want to point out something, because there's a few people who misunderstood some of the data I was showing there. That's not SIRE data. This is publicly available port state control information. So that's a combination of all the various different port state control regimes and a sort of a cut of that data. We don't have access to the SIRE data to be able to show, but that's why PSC data is often relied on as an indicator. So, yeah, those deficiencies relate to PIC. A very technical question here. I'm hoping do you know what PAGA systems are, or PAGA systems? PAGA. Does that ring a bell with you, either of you?
Not with me.
No, Hayden.
No.
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 Nigel, I don't think we know what a PAGA. Maybe it's the abbreviation that's the issue. So give us another sort of. If you could rephrase the question, perhaps we might be able to kind of do it. So let's just look through some of the other. So there's a question on the statistics. There's a good question here. I'm just going to take this while we look through from Davor. Would it be possible for OTG to simplify their training titles to allow better understanding by ratings? I think I'll take that one, having worked on this for many years, the creation of content and stuff. I think the focus on ratings is good. I know that IMEC, for example, put together a whole competency management system for ratings, and I think there is an understanding that ratings is better. I think what we're doing is we're trying to simplify the training overall, not just with ratings in mind, but breaking it down into smaller chunks and a bit like that pathway there, so that you perhaps don't need to put somebody through highly complex, like all the material. It may be that you just want them to understand some sort of more basic level. And Andy, you've been sort of doing that with a lot of the titles, looking at simplifications. And maybe you could kind of elaborate a little bit more for Davor.
Exactly, Raoul. So a lot of the time you'll see that there are two versions of the title. One would be, for example, IMDG would be advanced, and one would be basic. And it does clearly say that the basic is for the crew and the advanced is for the senior management team. So that is an example. And as you mentioned there, with sort of trying to make the subjects particularly clear, whether it's a compliance subject or whether it's social media and so on. There is a continuing effort, I would say, to improve the titles and to not just keep them relevant, but to grade them so that they are suitable for different ranks on board ship.
And for those of you that like technology, this is one of the ways it can play a real advantage, because we can start to see which questions are poorly performed in, and it might be that the material could explain that better, or we don't go into enough detail or whatever. So these are sort of, there are interesting things there. One comment I've got here, maybe Hayden, you could answer this one. It's sort of a bit of an observation, I guess. This gentleman, Mikhail, he's saying that it's really sees a lot of the problems with inspections, the common problem, the difficulty of communication between the inspector and the crew. And the main reason, he says, is poor emotional intelligence skills, empathy, cultural differences, and language barriers on both sides. And misunderstandings can lead to conflict between parties with unfortunate consequences for the inspection results. How can this problem be solved? Is it something you've come across, Hayden? I can't believe a charmer like you would ever have this problem. But...
yeah, you'd be surprised. It's a question of the right approach by the inspector. You know, the inspector must remember of what the desirous outcome is for the ship. You know, and the inspector goes on there, or a good inspector goes on like a blank page. You have no agenda. You've come to conduct the inspection. What you find is what you find. You know, you're not delving in. You've not been told to focus on this, focus on that. It's not a question of that. So a lot of it is in the inspector's approach, but a lot of it is on the preparation the ship has done and the culture on board. If the senior management team on board have got people into the mindset of the inspector is the enemy, do not answer any of his questions, you know, don't tell him your name, Pike, it's not going to go well.
Yeah. Good,
you know,
good.
so it's a question of preparation.
Yeah.
Well,
making sure.
I would also add as well, Hayden, that one of the questions I saw earlier, glancing at the chat there, was about the fact that the SMS on board is quite complicated for the ordinary seamen and the ABs to understand, and it's put into certain sort of technical language, and it's not really clarified for them. So one of the problems when the inspector comes and asks an AB about something to do with the SMS, they can find it quite difficult. So I think, again, that comes down to that sort of preparation in terms of, well, when you ask that question of your own ABs as a senior rank on board, do they give you a good answer? Or do they say, oh, no, I don't really know. I'm not sure about that. And if they're not sure about it, do something about it. Simplify the SMS, you know, make sure that they can understand it. And so it's not just about the inspector. So the person under pressure might feel that all the inspectors having a go at me, but they're not. The problem lies with the company SMS. So, you know, it's not just a one-way street. That's what I would say.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. I think,
again,
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but we've gone over time, and I think James needs to just take us home now. So it remains for me to thank Hayden and Andy for a fantastic contribution this morning. I hope you all found it as interesting as I did. And James, over to you.
Thanks, Raoul. Yes, and just to echo what Raoul said, thanks to Raoul, thanks to Andy and Hayden for a fascinating conversation this morning. I think that's really reflected in the chat and the Q&A section. I think it's really stimulated some very interesting discussions and very pertinent questions in there. So, as I did say at the outset, if there's questions that we haven't had time to address, which unfortunately there's a few of those, we will address those after this session, and we'll contact the individuals personally with an email response to that. Talking of emails, you will all receive an email from myself with a link to the recording of this session. So if there's any things that you want to recap on or share that link with any colleagues who perhaps couldn't attend the session, that's an opportunity to do so. Within that email, I'll also send you some links to where you can find out some further information about the SIRE and the RightShip training packages that we've mentioned and referred to throughout this discussion. So all that remains is for me to thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us. So the numbers attending and the engagement throughout this, I think, just highlights what a pertinent subject this is. So thanks again to the presenters. Thank you all for attending, and I wish you a very good rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you on one of our future webinars.